my dream for Africa. And
it is an historic event, and it continues in Washington through Thursday. 120 young African leaders from civil society and the private sector are meeting with each other and some of America's most important leaders to discuss change and the future of the continent. They heard from Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the State Department, and Tuesday took part in an open forum, a town hall meeting with President Barack Obama. He told them the future is in their hands.
Yes, youth can.
America offers encouragement and support for change and Africa's own aspirations. We'll meet and hear from forum participants and some of you. Next on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. It's Wednesday, August 4th. I am Shaka Sali. Today, we'll discuss the President's Forum with young African leaders, being held here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. The year 2010 marks 50 years of independence for 17 sub-Saharan African countries. To celebrate that milestone, U.S. President Barack Obama met with about 115 young African leaders from 46 countries for a town hall meeting at the White House Tuesday. The president and the young leaders exchanged views on how to best shape African systems, governments, and institutions over the next 50 years. VOA's Laura Bowman has more on the story.
President Obama got straight to the point in his meeting with young African leaders.
Welcome to the United States of America, and that includes even our friends from Ghana who beat us in the World Cup.
Now, to learn more on the President's Forum with young African leaders, I am joined by my colleague, VOA's Upfront co-host, Jackson Muvuganyi. Good afternoon, Jackson.
Good afternoon, Shaka.
I am terrific. You were at the White House yesterday when President Obama had his town hall meeting with the new African leaders, or the next African generation.
Yes.
Give us a sense as to how huge that occasion was, both really for the president and the young leaders in that room.
An honest, frank engagement and dialogue between the president and these young African leaders, who many say, you know, this type of accessibility they had with the U.S. president, some of them don't even have with their leaders back home. But they got to learn from each other, Shaka. They did learn that the U.S. is seeking new partnerships in Africa. These countries, a continent that is up and coming and developing at a very high rate. And he said, you know, he was very frank and blunt sometimes and said, you know, for the past 50 years, I mean, this year Africa, 17 African countries are celebrating 50 years after independence. And he said, you know, Africa has missed some huge opportunities. He gave an example of Kenya and South Korea. It says the GDP of Kenya in the 60s was higher than South Korea right now. If you juxtapose the two, it's now, you know, in any way related. But I think both parties learned from each other. You know, the young leaders honestly came away feeling energized about things of change. He said, you know, he used the same mantra he used during his campaign. He said, yes, we can, you know.
But, the meeting with Hillary Clinton, of course, the Secretary of State, and Ambassador John Ekason, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. Did you also attend those meetings?
Yes, I did. I did.
What was the atmosphere there like, if you had to compare and contrast it with the White House, especially given that President Obama, of course, he happens to be a very, very down-to-earth guy,
right,
who also perhaps the audience should know is celebrating today his 49th birthday.
Yes, and there's an air of excitement when there's a U.S. president in the room. And you could see that on their faces. They were all smiling, and they all wanted to shake his hand at the end. They were all putting up their hand, they wished to ask him. And I should say that for every one of them that got picked up to ask a question. I was very proud of these young African leaders, when you put it in, perspective. At the State Department, where they were earlier in the day before their White House meeting, Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, spoke to them and told them, Africa, you are Africa's future, and Africa's future is for Africans. She recognized, so did the president, that 60% of Africa's population are made of young people. That's the same message that President Obama took to Ghana, and this is something that was echoed through the whole discussion. You are the future of your continent, and so we need to start engaging at this moment.
What about at the level of expectations? Obviously, you must have gone into those meetings with some sort of expectations, you, Jackson. What is it that you expected to hear or to see that perhaps didn't happen?
Well, hosting a youth show, most of the issues these young people were talking about, or the theme of most of their panels, were things that we talked about on Upfront every Wednesday on the show, and things like entrepreneurship, things like leadership, governance, and I was very excited just to interact with them on, off the record or on the record about some of these things. I wanted to get an understanding of how optimistic they are that things are moving in their countries. How accessible are they to things like education? One of them told me, very interesting, because education is something that I'm really very passionate about, education reform. And he said, it's not really about the buildings, the beautiful buildings in which we talk about education reform, and people think, well, let's build a good school, but it's not about that. It's about the people that are teaching. It's about the teachers. So it's at the end of the day, it's teaching the teacher on how to deliver the message to the students. And then that education reform, he said, most of our education systems, which is something that we have acknowledged in the show, most of our African education systems are remnants from the 60s, the colonial era, and that is something that needs to change.
Well, thank you so much, Jackson, for your insight.
Thank you, Shaka.
You're most welcome. We'll continue to listen to you, of course, on Upfront Jackson every Wednesday at 17 hours UTC on Voice of America Radio. Now, joining us here